It's key to have no thermal bridges where you can, correct? And that's kind of what I'm hoping is that we can see with this design that we've maximized where we could from an energy efficiency point of view.
ProClimber inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable and energy efficient buildings to live, learn, work and play in. Welcome to the ProClimber podcast. In today's episode, I speak with Casper Valentin. I recently had a tour of his high-performance home in Raglan. This home is constructed using ICF block walls, high-performance windows, and a heat recovery ventilation unit, which takes advantage of a ground loop source. In June, it cost him just $10 to keep his whole home at 20 degrees Celsius. Casper, we're sitting here today in this house of yours, which is just amazing. It's pretty warm outside, beautifully cool inside here. Tell us a little bit about your life growing up in the Netherlands.
I started off as a young boy in a small country called Brunei. My dad worked for an oil company and we pretty much just moved wherever he had big projects on the go. I lived there for the first 8 years. Real nice, obviously it's nice and tropical. I suppose idyllic. You know, you're right beside the beach. You still had to go to school naturally, but it was a good time. And the indoor climate was always very nice there indeed. So all the AC was running all the time as well. And life was good. After the first 8 years, we moved to Scotland, which was rather quite a bit more different than Brunei. I think you've also been in Scotland for quite a bit, haven't you, Simon?
I have. I went and lived in Scotland for about 3 or 4 months. Back in 1995, I worked in a beautiful stone hotel called the Stonefield Castle Hotel up in Tarbet. Yeah, very, very different climate, wasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely was. We moved over in, I suppose, a season where it was still quite nice. I can still remember it, actually. It was back in August. Still summer, if you want to call Scotland having a summer. But soon, probably the month later, it was getting quite gloomy, very cold, I suppose. Indoors, it was nice. It was always 20 degrees because you had your central heating going. You were always inside, basically, in where we were. It was a long winter always. The winters were till, I'd say, end of April. And then you had a small, short summer where we always did a lot of stuff outside as much as you could. And then, sure enough, back in September, you'd go back inside again for the whole winter, pretty much. So yeah, that was my life till I was 18. I moved to Holland after that because I wanted to study horticulture. Now, it's not your standard horticulture that most people are used to. It's the Dutch way, which is quite a bit different.
Oh, please tell us about it.
We would call it commercial glasshouse growing. Most horticulturists would say you might be doing stuff outside as well with plants. But in this case, in Holland, yeah, there's not much outdoor growing at all. It's all in glass houses. So what you'd learn at university there would be obviously stuff within a glass house. Anything from your growing. You'd also be doing a lot of accounting. So very much geared towards being able to run a glass house property. They weren't small. They were all big glass house properties. Normally there would be 6+ hectares full of glass.
Okay, that's pretty big.
Yeah, pretty big. And also not just your small glasses. They would be anything from 6 to 10 meters high. Fully climate controlled. Everything was done heating wise with big boilers. Summer, you'd be blocking out sunlight with extra shading. You'd also be doing a lot of venting with your automatic vents. I was always intrigued with both the growing and also automation, I suppose. And I think that sort of kickstarted my passive house journey in New Zealand as well.
Fantastic. After the horticulture side, you moved into the IT industry. Tell us about that.
That was only 10 years ago. I actually did a bit of horticulture here too in New Zealand.
You did? Okay.
Before I moved to IT. So I got headhunted to grow cut flower orchids in Hamilton. There was a job on the go. They found me in Holland. So I moved over from Holland to New Zealand. And I did that actually for about 7 or 8 years. And again, same thing. So obviously in New Zealand, it's not as big, but you'd have a similar concept whereby you'd have big glass houses, a lot of orchids there, not just 10 of them, but more like 40 or 50,000 plants that you had to take care of. It wasn't a 9 to 5 job either. It was 24/7, 7 days a week. Lucky if you could take 3 weeks off out of the year, which normally was always in the January months, which was always nice because it was summer. But yeah, it was a full-on job, which I loved. you're always thinking about climate. Basically, every minute of the day, you're pretty much thinking, what is the temperature like in the glass house? Is the boiler going? Do I need to put extra whitewash on the roof? Have you got any pests in the glass house? You're always doing something. So I think that was rather interesting from what I found.
So the beauty about it is that, because obviously, as you're saying, any type of farming is really reliant on the weather, isn't it? But what I'm getting from you is that you were able to control the environment that those plants were growing in, weren't you?
Yeah, correct. In this case, in summer, you try to keep the heat out, and that was rather easy. You'd just be using shading. You might get, say, 28 degrees with shading, whereas if you don't have the shading, it might run up to, say, 40 degrees. So there was quite a stark difference between using those methods. And then in winter, you'd be using your boiler with your radiant heating pipes so that you could keep the humidity fairly low, low enough to keep mold off your flowers, because the flowers were rather expensive to sell. Talking about $10+ per stem. Every stem that you'd lose was a rather big thing for the company. Always mindful of these things.
So now when you moved from Scotland to New Zealand, you said in Scotland you were living in a home where you had a central heating system that you could control your environment once again. How did you find living in New Zealand homes?
I was expecting it to be fairly easy living, I suppose, because you start reading about New Zealand, temperate climate. I was more thinking about southern France, where it's always nice and warm, or in Spain, temperate as well. But what you tend to find is in summer, sure, it's nice to be outside. But in summer, I'd find it to be very hot inside. And then in winter, this was my first experience of seeing my breath actually in winter. You know, when you exhale, you start to see the condensation of your breath. Normally you'd see that outside, but in this case, I saw it inside. I thought that was rather unique.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Obviously, this house we're going to talk about in quite a lot of detail, but you were telling me earlier that the house before this is the first house that you actually started using high-performance construction methods. So can you tell us a little bit about that build?
Yeah, sure. We started off, I suppose, our passive house journey close to 2010, I think. Back then, I believe that what the Passive House Institute had just started. There weren't any official passive house designers yet from memory. I met a person, just pure luck, I suppose, someone in Hamilton that was an architect and was keen to start this passive house journey. And we just got so excited ourselves as well, because obviously we were so used to this cold, damp house that we lived in Hamilton that we just wanted something different. And the only way that we could see forward was going the passive house way, because it was a proven method. But also with having the architect alongside us, who had quite a bit of experience already with high-performance buildings, but not passive house as yet, felt that was the right step to go towards the passive house concept.
Great. And what sort of methodologies did you use for constructing that? What was the walls and the roof built out of?
There weren't many products. Sorry, there were products around, but nothing was really proven in New Zealand other than, I suppose, a couple of things. They had insulated panels already. They also had ICF blockwork. And naturally, there's also timber construction. If you start talking to the architect, you know, they've obviously got their preferences, but they provide you with the pros and cons. And we found that at the end of the day, ICF seemed the right choice to us. It already had a bit of a proven record as well in New Zealand. We had spoken to quite a few homeowners already who had built with ICF as well. And that felt for us the right way. So once you start choosing a product like that, then the whole process starts of detailing other things like your roof structure, your windows, your slab details. How do you connect your ICF blockwork to your slab? And that's where the architect was super useful. He really knows his thing. He could also implement this project into his studies as well with Passive House.
Once you'd finished the construction of that home and you moved in, tell us a bit about what the experience was like living in a passive house.
Yeah, so we moved in summer. In this case, you could easily just sit inside and have the doors closed and not feel the heat. That was rather unusual to us as well. And the other thing too is, I suppose, once you keep the doors closed, there would also always be fresh air coming in the building with the ventilation system. And I think that was the beauty of the whole system, is that you could literally, like a glass house, I suppose, keep it all nice and steady and just making it all a nice place to be in.
So you obviously really enjoyed the way that the ICF block construction worked for you the first time, because in the house we're sitting in at the moment, which is your second high-performance build, you've chosen the same method, haven't you?
Correct. Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about the rest of the envelope of this building. So we've got ICF block in the walls. What have you done to insulate the slab?
Pretty much standard. You've got your standard slab insulation, but it's continuous. So what happens then is the whole slab is fully insulated with polystyrene, and then it connects nicely with your ICF block work going up. It almost becomes like a little bathtub in a way. That's the first thing, that you start heavily with the walls. So the ICF block work goes up. And once all the block work is up, you don't put your windows in yet. You basically then start with your roof structure, which I'm real happy that we got advice from ProClimate in that case, because we went with a type of roof structure where we could have a high ceiling. It did mean that you have to adhere to a certain way of building. You need to have your insulation fully enclosed. Couldn't have any air gaps there in the ceiling either. So we used you, Simon, and also probably your colleagues as well, because you probably had a few discussions with your colleagues too on what the best approach was with these skillion roofs.
Of course.
Yep.
Just to look at the roof build-up, so you've got a metal roof, right? And then you've got a ventilated cavity below the iron. Then you've got your Solitex Mento roof underlay directly in contact with how much insulation have you got in the roof?
400 mil. Initially, we were hoping that we would only have to use 300 mil of insulation. But because of the span of this roof, we had to actually go up the size of the skillion roof to 400 mil. And looking back at it, I'm actually real glad that we went to 400 mil, because there's a huge temperature difference between the different layers of insulation. And I'd always recommend going for at least 400 mil.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Intello layer on the inside, which is completing the air tightness layer from the wall connection into the roof.
Yep.
During this process, you've installed a whole lot of sensors, haven't you? Tell us why you decided to do that.
It might have always been ingrained in my system, especially from my growing background, whereby it would always be something, all right, you do something, let's measure it. And then once you measure it, let's see what the results are. That's how growing works. You can't just do whatever you feel like. And I would say the same would apply to this building here. You really want to know how the roof structure performs, but also things like the slab. How does the slab perform? What's the temperature underneath the polystyrene? What's the temperature just above the polystyrene? Basically, you start to look at different components and which components of the build work well and which ones could you potentially improve on for your next build. I suppose that's the end goal, right? You want to always fine-tune the build that you've done. There's always something better at the next.
Because you've used PHPP to design the build so that you had a really good idea of the amount of energy that the house was going to use. And now you're able to actually measure that and see that in real world, aren't you? So that's pretty exciting, because often, we'll design a passive house, you'll live in it, it's comfortable and everything. But I really like the idea of that we can actually see what's going on now. We can delve into those sensors and find out, is it actually performing? So, I'm really interested to hear more from you about what you've learned so far from those sensors.
We started off doing a lot of measurements with the first passive house that we got commissioned back in 2012. That one had a lot of sensors too already. We wanted to see how it truly performed. And we did a lot of stuff with the architect. The architect saw all the data so that he would also be able to work on all his following projects to make sure that it was even better. But what you do tend to see is that even on the east-facing windows, you don't want to maximize your east-facing windows either, because in the morning, if you've got your morning sun shorts, it's nice, but only when you really need it, because you don't want the house to quickly start heating up. You want to keep the heat out for as long as possible, but again, you don't want to live in a box without any windows. So there's a bit of a balance, I suppose. That's where we want to make sure that everything gets measured. And that's the same here. We're measuring pretty much every minute of the day and allowing us to really look at different aspects of the build.
And we were having a walk around just now. So today, and the sun is obviously moving over. We're in January, so it's one of the warmest months in New Zealand. And what I was really intrigued to see is that you've really thought carefully about your shading. On the northern side, you've got a bit of an overhang, haven't you, that you've created to stop the sunlight coming into that ranch slider that you've got there and hitting your concrete floor. And then, of course, once you've overheated the concrete slab, it's very difficult to get rid of that heat, isn't it?
Especially if you've got a lot of insulation.
Yeah.
If you start insulating the slab, then you're in trouble. It's key to insulate the slab, but keep the sun out. I think that's sort of simple physics. But what you have seen most likely as well is that the sun doesn't hit the concrete at all at the moment. It may only start to hit the concrete maybe from end of February, early March. And that's also when you tend to start to see the temperatures dropping anyway outside. And that's fine. From then on, the sun can come in the whole day if need be.
So you're actually expecting the sun to come through in the winter months and then give you that extra heating that you need.
Correct. So we purposely only went for a certain depth of overhang. You can nicely model that nicely as well. So make sure that you've only got overhangs when you absolutely need it. That's rather important to be able to not have to use too much heat in winter as well.
Now, another thing we were talking about earlier is your ventilation system, because obviously we're living in a house, or we're sitting in a house here where we've got some really well insulated elements to the building. We've also got an air tightness layer, which is ensuring that the energy that's stored in the inside of the building is not just lost to the outside. And of course, we need to ventilate. We need to bring in fresh air, don't we? So tell us a bit about the Zehnder system that you've got here.
In our first house, we went with Zehnder, and we loved it. Zehnder obviously has got a number of upgrades that they always do. In this case, we didn't just go with a standard ventilation system, but we also included a ground source ventilation system of Zehnder. And what it does in summer, it actually drops the temperature quite a bit. So today, what you would have seen, 26 degrees from memory, what we looked at. And the incoming air after it went through the ground source was 17 degrees. So what you're effectively giving the building is cooler than 20 degree average supply air, which helps the building not to quickly heat up. That's rather key that we've got that ground source as well to really not just keep it 25 degrees, but let's aim for a bit better. Let's aim for 23 degrees maximum. That's what we are achieving in this house, even in the heights of summer.
It's amazing. And what sort of amount of energy are you using to actually move that water around?
In our case, 4 watts.
Wow.
It's like an LED light bulb. All it needs to do, it needs to just run water through a loop and then past a little radiator. And that radiator simply just passes either the warmth or the coolness to the air that's coming through.
And the heat recovery unit itself, how many watts is that using?
4 watts is not just 4 watts for cooling. If you're cooling, naturally, you'd also have the ventilation system run slightly higher as well. Mm-hmm. On full cool mode, you would be using 4 watts for your ground source, but then also a total of 75 watts for your ventilation system. Now, part of that 75 watts would be for your cooling, but also partly also to keep your CO2 levels nice and low as well. In this case, 80 watts of total capacity.
That's amazing. That's sort of the amount of energy that we used to run one incandescent light bulb, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
In the old days before LEDs.
Yeah, that's right. And in this case, it cools the whole house.
Yeah.
So what you will see today, and you'd be seeing, including your ventilation, a COP of about 10 to 1.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lot better than naturally your even your best heat pumps.
Yeah, of course. I was just feeling earlier as I was walking around and sitting in the house that you don't have that sort of blast of cold air that you would if you've got an air conditioning unit run. It's just a constant, comfortable temperature, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah, it's important to always ventilate. It's key to not just turn the ventilation system off or very low, because that could mean that obviously the building would start heating up a bit more. So just keep the unit going all day, every day. In away mode, if you're away and it's in winter, you don't necessarily have to ventilate that much because then the CO2 levels aren't high. But just keep ventilating. And then when you are at home, you might increase the ventilation slightly more depending on the CO2 levels. Yeah.
But you're controlling that automatically, aren't you? Or you're planning to?
So at the moment, we've got one CO2 sensor for one room. As I'm commissioning the ventilation system even more, what I'll be doing is I'll be monitoring CO2 levels in each room. And whichever room is occupied, you'd be increasing the ventilation speed based on the requirements. So yeah, if you're in your bedroom, yes, the CO2 levels would go up, but you would not have to ventilate a lot more to be able to get those CO2 levels.
You've got a lot of sensors in this house. Let's have a look at the roof, for example. So we've got the metal roof. Can you give us a little bit of an idea about some of the findings that you found about the different temperatures across the different layers of the roof structure?
You want to know what happened today, I suppose?
Yes.
Because today was rather hot. I did some measurements at 10 o'clock in the morning already. You know, it wasn't the hottest part of the day. And what you'd already see underneath the roof, it would be 50 degrees. Not just that, but it would also have a very low humidity. Just below, obviously, the roof iron, you'd have your Proclima Mento. And that Mento would have the similar temperature, but would have a higher humidity. You start talking with Proclima around these findings. Proclima can then verify whether those stats are correct or the way that they believe it should be. So you know quite a bit about that, and you actually said, "Yeah, that's exactly how the product is supposed to work," Simon. So that was amazing to see, to be honest.
Yeah. We were just talking, weren't we, about the fact that because it's hot today, I think you said 50 degrees on the roof, and we've got something like 22 degrees inside.
Yep.
So the drive is from the outside to the inside. And the beauty about the Intello is that it's designed to become more diffusion open in that position. So basically what that does is any moisture that is within the thermal envelope of the building is now allowed to go through the Intello back to the inside of the building and be expelled by the ventilation system. So it's this constant system of keeping the insulation layer and the structural layer of the building dry and allowing the insulation to perform as best as it can.
I did do some measurements at 7 o'clock in the morning too. You could see that the amount of moisture in the air back then was quite a bit lower in each layer, whereas at 10 o'clock it was already quite a bit higher. And that's where that drive of moisture that you've just mentioned occurs. Yep.
And in winter, because you've been measuring the house for a while now, haven't you? So in winter you were seeing the opposite effect, were you?
I've only moved in since September, October, and look, I do take a little holiday after after having built the house for quite some time. So what will happen this winter? I'll be commissioning more and more sensors as we go, and in this case, the sensors in the roof will be continuously monitored. And I'd be keen to see what happens then too, Simon. You've got some thoughts, and maybe we'll keep those thoughts to yourself for now and see if I come to the same conclusion.
Fantastic. And then you've also got sensors in the walls and under the slab as well, haven't you?
Correct.
So what are you hoping to understand from them?
Mainly temperature difference. That's the biggest thing. Because what I've noticed with ICF, the previous house was ICF with also plaster on the outside. What we literally saw was the outside wall ice up in winter.
Really?
Literally, you'd feel the wall and you'd feel ice on the wall. That told me already straight away, 20 degrees inside, with an iced up wall on the outside, perfect. That's exactly what you want to see.
Because the insulation is working properly.
Yeah. And that's also kind of what I'm hoping in this case as well, that we'll be seeing similar things. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that the inside stays at 20 degrees and see what the temperature gradient does within the entire ICF wall structure. So we've got plenty of sensors there too. We'd have one on the inside surface, one on the outside surface, but also bang in the middle as well, to see how much energy is lost throughout the entire ICF blockwork.
Because it's so different to what you often see in New Zealand houses on a cold morning. If you look at them, you can actually see lines of the frame, can't you, on the outside of the cladding, where you can see the heat actually bleeding through and keeping the outside of the building warm.
Correct. And I think that's exactly not what you want to see. It's key to have no thermal bridges where you can. And that's kind of what I'm hoping, is that we can see with this design that we've maximized where we could from an energy efficiency point of view.
And the other thing is, as we walk from one room to another in this house, it feels like it's a very constant temperature on all the rooms and all the sides of the building as well.
Yep.
Whereas often you'd walk into a standard build and the western side, if it's the afternoon, it'll be much hotter than on the eastern side, wouldn't it? So you've got that constant temperature across the whole home.
That's right. Look, it's not a big home, but most homes you would see differences already, from room to room, even if they might be right beside each other. Now, in this case, we might have gone overboard a bit too, but the internal walls are also ICF blockwork. Not so much from an insulation point of view, or from a thermal point of view, but more from a sound reduction point of view. It's a small home where you can make sure that your rooms are as quiet as possible, then at least you can have a proper sleep when someone else is watching TV, for example. So we've chosen purposely also to have an ICF blockwork inside, which may also help from a thermal point of view as well.
And it's quite amazing as well, isn't it? Sitting inside here, you've got a busy road outside. If we step outside, you can hear the cars going by. And inside, it's perfectly quiet, isn't it?
I didn't hear it come in at all today. It's quiet. I just have to make sure that I keep looking out the window to see if someone's at the front door.
Exactly. And also, just before we were about to start recording this, we had a power cut, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you jinxed it today, Simon, but 5 minutes ahead of this recording, the power went off. I could just hear it. There's certain things, obviously, that you do hear normally, is all those background noises stopped. So suddenly we had no power.
So I think that's a question we sometimes get at ProClimate is, okay, fine, I've built this airtight building. Now I've got this ventilation system that's bringing fresh air in. What happens when you have a power cut? How would you answer that?
Have you got a generator?
No, let's say we don't.
Look, if you don't have a generator or any other backup source, you could still open up the windows, and that's not a biggie. That's what most Kiwi homes do anyway. They love their indoor-outdoor flow regardless. They would open up the windows and doors, and we would do the same. And there's no reason why we would open it. It's a nice day today, so let's just open up the windows and just enjoy, I suppose, the natural breeze.
Exactly. Oh, well, it's really interesting to see what you've got going here, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in winter. It's been for me a real eye-opener coming to a house designed with the Passive House planning package, and you've obviously really thought about the shading and the insulation and air tightness and the ventilation. So it's extremely comfortable in summer, which I think is something that I certainly remember last year in the news in January or February. We had a lot of articles about bedrooms overheating, especially in some of the new builds at the moment, where perhaps there's very little eaves or anything like that. And I saw people complaining of 30-degree bedrooms.
Possible.
That can't be comfortable to sleep in, would it?
I would always recommend talking to a designer, especially a designer that has got a lot of experience with energy modeling. Without a proper designer like that, I think you'll make a lot of mistakes and you try to rectify them after the build, which is not what you want to do.
No, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm living in a 55-year-old house, and yeah, I can experience that exactly. There's things that I can do, like I've installed a ventilation system. I mean, I'm trying to get some external shading now, but on the western side of my building, I have no insulation. It's a brick and tile. I've got some external shading now, but still 27 degrees yesterday afternoon when I got home. So as you're saying, it's about planning the house before you build it, because otherwise it's really difficult and expensive to get it working properly afterwards. I think we're all aware that, the weather patterns are changing. Certainly overheating seems to be a major problem. I think a lot of people buy perhaps a brand new home in New Zealand and then they assume that it's going to be warm in winter and cool in summer. But I certainly hear people talking about the fact that they're not actually experiencing that. So I think what you're saying is you're right on track, is people should really be asking the architect and the builder, what are the expectations of the performance of this building? And if they're not getting those answers, dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I did mention I would always recommend 400 mil of insulation in the ceiling. Obviously has some caveats to it. You need to be able to do the energy modeling, because otherwise you might be trapping more heat into the building.
Another interesting thing about this building is that it's, as you say, a pitched roof, so a skillion roof design. Traditionally, skillion roofs are sometimes seen as higher risk. I think there's actually a huge amount of value in doing a skillion roof, because compared to a truss roof, you can easily seal the two layers on the outside and the inside and ensure that that insulation layer actually works properly. And another thing I thought was really interesting was the fact that the temperatures between the outside, the middle, and the inside of the insulation, it wasn't sort of half the temperature gap in the middle, was it?
50 degrees in the roof at the very top. And when you're halfway in between, so say 200 mil of insulation, it was still at 26 degrees. So to me, 26 degrees is too warm. You don't want the ceiling to be already at 26 degrees. You want to aim for lower. So what we saw there is obviously the heat was trying to drive through. And at 400 mil, it was down to 23 degrees. So you'd still have another drop of 3 degrees. It gets less and less as you start increasing the insulation. It is something to be mindful of, is that a little bit of extra insulation does make a difference to your surface temperature.
Tell us a little bit, just to sort of, we're getting towards the end of the interview now, but tell us a little bit about the windows that you've chosen here.
Maybe it might just be the Waikato area, but in this case, we could easily go with double glazing, which was a benefit. It's less costly, because what tends to happen there too is tends to be not as insulative as a 3-layered glass. But we just went with high-performing double glazed windows in this case, which is sufficient as you notice.
Yeah, it's a really comfortable house. And I would certainly recommend to anyone that's listening to this podcast that thinks, wow, this is a great idea. I would definitely recommend that they go out and try and find a high-performance building that they can perhaps visit. I know in Christchurch, for example, they have those super home tours, for example, but there are Passive House open days as well that you can attend around the country. So I would definitely recommend to people that it's well worth going out there and visiting these houses and talking to people and then understanding how they might work.
I think that's every year, isn't it? Those tours, it's not once every 4 or 5 years. It's every year.
Exactly. I'm really excited to try and see if we can speak to people up here in Auckland, because obviously Christchurch, they've really developed those bus tours. I think we need to do something like that in Auckland and perhaps some of the other regions up in North Island, so that people can realize that passive house or high performance building is not just for the South Island. There are real reasons why you would want to use it in the North Island as well, isn't it?
Yep, especially in the summer.
Yeah,
that's what I've noticed.
All right, Casper, thank you very much for your time today. It's been
no problem.
Fantastic chatting with you, and we'll speak again soon. Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.